Welcome, Wendy. We're giving it a few minutes as folks are kind of slow to come in.
Jeanette, should we give it maybe another minute or two if people are loading the Teams software?
Yep, sure.
Okay,
That's fine.
sounds good.
Okay. Joy, did you got a few emails from folks who are looking for the login still?
I haven't gotten any since I sent it out. I've now sent it out to everyone registered and put it on the listserv.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Hi, everybody. We're still giving people a few seconds, minutes to come in before we get started. Bear with us.
If you'd like, Jeanette, I'll go ahead and just lay out the ground rules for the meeting.
Sure.
All right. And we'll let folks in as they come. Thanks for coming to our first Thursdays. Just a couple of things to note with Teams. One is you'll want to leave off your camera because we will be recording the session, so that way you won't get recorded. And I would suggest, if you're not speaking, to mute your microphone as well. If you do have a question, you can either raise your hand, there's a raise your hand feature in Teams, or you can type it into the chat, which we'll be monitoring. So just keep those things in mind. My name is Kevin Unrath. I'm the president of the Vermont Library Association and the director of the Pearson Library in Shelburne, and welcome to our first Thursdays celebrating Fair Housing Month, which is coming up in a couple months. And I'll briefly introduce my co-presenters today, and then they'll introduce themselves as they present. We have on hand from the State Library folks who I'm sure you've already come to know and love: Laura Keenan, Jonathan Clark, Jeanette Schaefer, and Joy Warland. And then our special guest today is Jessica Hyman. She's the director of the CVOEO's Fair Housing Project. And it was actually the work of CVOEO, Jessica, and the Department of Libraries to get a grant to make this and other fair housing related things happen. So thanks to them for being here. With that, I'd like to just mention that VLA is sponsoring these first Thursdays all the way through to the conference that's happening in late May. Our next first Thursday is going to be presented by Emily Christ at Champlain College, and she is presenting on critical whiteness and studying race in libraries. I think it's going to be a very interesting presentation, and it is part of her PhD work that she's been doing. So I'll put a link to that here shortly, so you can take a look at that. But to move on to today's topic, we are looking at things that we can do to explore issues of fair housing and present those to our patrons as an issue of importance here in Vermont. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess to talk about why Fair Housing Month and why fair housing is important.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I'm really happy to be here today, and so happy to be working with the two library organizations. So I'm Jess Hyman with the Fair Housing Project at CVOEO, the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, and our Fair Housing Project is one of our 3 statewide housing advocacy programs, along with Vermont Tenants and the Mobile Home Program. And Fair Housing Month, which happens in April, celebrates the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968. And we've been holding activities here in Vermont during Fair Housing Month in April for many years. And we use this time to really celebrate community and inclusivity. And the activities have included everything from workshops and discussions to local rallies, speakers, art contests, art activities, writing contests, and all sorts of things that help bring people together to really think about the role that housing plays in our communities, and also the importance of ensuring that housing is accessible and available to everyone. Because as we know, housing is really important, and it's where we live is central to so many pieces of our lives. It affects our access to education, where our kids go to school, access to jobs, our exposure to community, exposure to environmental hazards, to crime. It really makes a difference. Where we live makes a difference. And then housing is also a tool for generational wealth development. And so having housing that's available and accessible and safe and affordable for everyone is really important for all these social and community benefits to be realized. And as we've seen, especially now during COVID, that housing is integral to our individual and family and community health. And Vermont has significant housing challenges. There's not enough housing. What's out there just isn't always affordable or isn't the right size. We also have a homelessness problem in Vermont where so many individuals and families do not have safe and stable homes. As of this month, there are about a little more than 2,500 people who were either formerly homeless or in precarious housing situations who are being housed in hotels as part of the COVID relief plan. So that's 2,500 people without safe and stable homes. And then there are another thousands and tens of thousands of people who are living in situations that just aren't affordable. And so we also know that housing discrimination and access to housing is affected by the availability. So having this tight housing market makes it even more challenging for folks. So when affordability and accessibility are low, housing discrimination can happen. And we have protections, and that's what we have the Fair Housing Act, which we celebrate in April, and that protects protects everyone from discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, family status, and disability. And then Vermont has additional protections based on sexual orientation, gender identity, age, marital status, receipt of public assistance, that includes Section 8, and then also victims of abuse, sexual assault, and stalking are also protected. So we have all these amazing protections that are part of our state and federal law, but despite this law, discrimination still happens, and a lot of it that happens is not reported and isn't always addressed. And so as part of our work, we do a lot of education and outreach related to fair housing law and make sure that everyone understands their rights and responsibilities under the law. And that's one piece of our work. And the other piece is the more celebratory community-based work that we're really excited to be sharing with all of you, and to be seeing more activities happen around the state to raise awareness about the importance of home and community and inclusivity in our communities. So we're really looking forward to having you all involved in April Fair Housing Month activities. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jess. I'm going to jump in now to connect what Jess was saying to libraries. And we wanted to give you a quick exploration of how housing issues intersect with library services. And while this may be obvious to some of you, especially if you've joined us in the past for the previous workshop on this topic that we did earlier this year, even then, we still wanted to articulate why we at the Vermont Department of Libraries thought that connecting libraries with fair housing issues made sense. So as you know, one of the foundational principles of librarianship is reducing barriers to access. And people who are facing housing insecurity or housing discrimination may lack the physical address that our policies may say is necessary for obtaining a library card. So how can libraries communicate to the members of our community who are facing housing insecurity or housing discrimination that they are just as valuable and deserving of access? That their housing insecurity will not prevent them from accessing our services or from being seen as part of our community? And how can our policies and practices reflect this? Libraries are also about information. So they often host discussions on challenging community issues. They help their communities wrestle with social justice issues, and they help educate their communities on a variety of things. Fair housing issues can be another area of discussion potentially for your community. Libraries also serve as a place of community gathering that is open to everyone. Access is not predicated on home ownership or housing security, as you know. So we serve the needs of patrons across Maslow's hierarchy, from a place to warm up, a third space, to a place of self-actualization and community building. And housing issues also affect how our libraries are funded. We depend on tax revenues, and the fewer people who can afford to live here, the fewer taxpayers we have to support our important work. So for all of these reasons, and probably many more that you can identify, we believe that bringing fair housing issues to libraries makes sense. And we are glad that you've joined us here today to talk about this. So next up is Jeanette.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. So in the spirit of celebrating Fair Housing Month, we would like to introduce you to some activities and resources that we're building. And my colleagues are going to talk through the individual components of those. But really, we're hoping that you can see this as a menu of choices. You can do one or all, depending on how much energy and time you have. Most of these are geared toward being able to be done virtually or with social distancing. So we very much had COVID in mind, because in April we'll probably still need to be mindful of that. So all of these can be done to be COVID safe. And we also wanted to just remind you that Fair Housing Month is April, but you could really do all of these activities throughout the summer, just to kind of stretch it out a little bit and to help raise awareness. So with that introduction, and I'm going to put the link to the resources and activities list up, and just note that we haven't completed all the activities on that page yet. It will be done by March 1st, and we'll send out a reminder again that it is ready. So I think Joy is next. Joy, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody and welcome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book list. We have a book and film list that's been developed, and it's a little bit of a work in progress, but there are a lot of resources on there, and there are books for youth as well as adults. And VitLib has book sets for 2 of the books. So you can do a book club, of course, and a discussion about any of the books on the list, or even other books that you find yourself that are related to this topic. But we do have book sets. We have 8 sets of 10 books for 2 of the titles. So those 2 titles are Race for Profit: How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Home Ownership, and that's by Kianga Yamata Taylor. And that book is about, it's a description and analysis of housing discrimination and exploitation of Black homeowners that occurred in spite of the laws, sort of like what Jess was saying at the beginning. After the Housing and Urban Development Act in 1968, that was supposed to address this issue. A lot of really awful discrimination continued to happen. So that's one of the books that we have a book set of. And then we also have Evicted: Poverty and Profit in the American City by Matthew Desmond. And that book follows 8 families in Milwaukee and their struggles to keep housing. And it really makes the connections between the cycle of housing insecurity with poverty and inequality. So both of those have discussion sets, discussion guide, with them, and some other resources. There's a lot of online materials around those books, and so we have a collection of all that will go out with the sets, and the book sets can be requested through Clover. So the regular Clover protocol, 60-day checkout. You can't schedule these in advance, so just be mindful of that when you're, a lot of people are going to be wanting these in April, but of course, as Jeanette says, it doesn't have to be in April. So if you don't get it in April, you can obviously still do it. And then just make sure to get them back with a full set, as always. So I wanted to touch just briefly also on some suggestions about promotion for this when you do it. Of course, you will do your normal methods, your website, your social media, newsletters, Front Porch Forum. But I thought also it would be helpful to think about targeted promotion for this. So this is an issue that churches and other institutions of faith are often very interested in. So you could make sure your outreach goes to those organizations in your town, high schools, local housing organizations, and social justice organizations. For example, the local chapter of Showing Up for Racial Justice would be a good one, or the Peace and Justice Center, if you are near any of those places. So other than that, just your usual promotion, but because it is a specific topic, and I think it would be helpful to just reach out to people and organizations that know people who would be interested in this. So I hope lots of you do book discussions, and get in touch if you have any trouble finding the books from Clover or anything. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Joy. This is Kevin. I'm going to just touch briefly on leading what I would call charged book discussions. So those are a couple of great titles that the state and this grant through CVOEO is providing. Both of them, I think, would be a little outside of what I would consider my typical comfort range when leading a book discussion. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, give you some suggestions, but one big resource I'd like to point you in the direction of, and I'll paste it in now, is a previous First Thursday that we had. We invited Laura Jimenez to talk with us about leading a discussion. Laura is a professor out of Boston, and she and Jason Broughton had a discussion about how to lead an anti-racism book group around The Hate U Give. That presentation was co-sponsored by the Vermont Humanities Council, and there's a link to the full presentation. And basically, they go through a good hour of the pitfalls and challenges and the rewards of leading a discussion around a challenging book. So if you're interested in that topic, I'd highly recommend that presentation. And I just put the YouTube link in for you to view that. So with that said, I just want to spend a few minutes discussing leading charged discussions. And by charged, I mean a discussion that could arise out of studying difference or power or inequality or other emotional or potentially controversial topics. I think it's really important that libraries don't shy away from that, that we fully engage our communities in these topics. But there are some good ways to go about doing that that lead to productive, meaningful discussions. So first of all, I think it's important, if you're leading a discussion, to agree upon some baseline principles. So have some objectives that you lay out for what you're trying to talk about, what the goal is, and make sure that you have some buy-in from your group. So that's one tip that I'd give. And I found personally it's easier to lead discussions about challenging topics with a group that's already established, so there's some level of trust, because it's harder to build trust around a difficult or a challenging or a charged topic to begin with. So sometimes introducing these books into already established book groups is a good way to go. I suggest considering where you're coming from or considering your own identity when you're going into a book that is about a topic such as this. So if you're looking at issues of race or class, privilege or inequality, definitely do some soul searching in terms of what your experience is, because that'll make any discussion that you facilitate more genuine. So do that check. Also, and this is a tough one for me because I like to get the answer to questions, but it's really important to accept that the discussion that you'll likely have won't have a lot of closure necessarily. Topics that are controversial typically don't have easy answers. So you're not going to fix the problem in one sitting of your book group, but you're at least going to get people thinking about the levels and the nuances and the challenges. So make sure to accept the fact that you're not necessarily going to achieve closure in any sort of discussion that you have, but you may find some interesting surprises. And the last tip that I have is how to deal with comments that are unexpected and potentially hurtful. Now, if I remember correctly, Jason had a great response, and I'm just basically paraphrasing what he said in his discussion with Dr. Jimenez. But the right way to do it is to try to depersonalize that comment to keep the conversation going. So if someone says something that's potentially hurtful, you can say, "Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'm sure many people feel the same way you do, and you've just given us the opportunity to talk about it." So that way you're not either going for the bait or kind of giving into what could be a kind of a situation that you're trying to be provoked in. Or maybe you're not. Maybe it was an innocent comment that doesn't sound innocent to other ears. But in any case, depersonalizing. So those are my own tips for leading challenging conversations. And I would just close by saying I'd highly recommend that hour-long First Thursdays that Jason and Laura Jimenez did. And thank you. Well, let me introduce, I'm going to turn it back over to Jess now to talk a little bit about local focus. So thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. those were great tips. I'm gonna watch that first Thursday as well. So when you're having local discussions around housing, whether it's discussions that are focused on a book or community conversations on housing, there's a lot of ways that you can really make your conversations local. So even if you're talking about the race for profit or evicted books, or any other books related to housing, and you have your series of questions that you're discussing and your content related to the book, we have some suggestions for ways to really bring the topic home and to make the content relevant to what may be going on in your own community, and to help and to take some of the things that we're learning from these really important books that often deal with issues on a national level, and focus on some more urban areas as well. How can we bring those concepts home and see how they relate to what's going on in our communities and in Vermont? And so some of the things that you can invite your participants to be thinking about and talking about it are questions like, how inclusive is your community? What types of housing exist in your community? Is it single family homes? Is it multifamily homes? Are there mobile home parks? Are there senior housing, group homes? Are the majority of the housing units in your community rented or owner occupied? Does your community have enough housing that's affordable, accessible, and right-sized? And also, what groups of people are struggling in your community? And how does not having access to safe or stable housing affect their lives? So, a lot of times we have preconceived ideas about who's homeless or who's struggling with housing, and it's really important to broaden those perceptions and to think about college students or veterans, families with children, people who are fully employed, seniors. All of these groups struggle in their housing and face really specific challenges related to that. For example, there's a large number of families who are homeless, and so when kids don't have a stable home, it makes it really hard to focus on schooling, or they may be moving around from one school to another. And so looking at what are some of the local issues in your community can be really, really important. And looking at what are the barriers for folks to access safe and affordable housing. Also, you can look at how local and state zoning might have affected who lives in your community and where they live. The decisions that are made on a local level about housing development help shape what our communities look like and who gets to live in different parts of our communities, and who's participating in the local decision making around housing, and more importantly, who's left out of that decision making. And it's also really, really good to look at your community and to see whether there is a local housing committee or a housing trust fund or a community land trust. And if so, how are these structures benefiting your local housing landscape? Or if they don't exist, what are some options? What are some potential for creating some structures that can help you address whatever housing needs are in your community? So there's so many ways that you can bring these bigger conversations home to your communities, and to look at ways to identify your local housing needs and find some local solutions to help ensure that everyone has access to safe, affordable, and fair housing, and especially those people who have been traditionally marginalized or discriminated against. And we, as part of this project, we can help, and we really want to help. We want to talk to you. We want to hear what's happening in your communities and what housing questions you have. And so some of the things that the Fair Housing Project can help you with, for Fair Housing Month and also year-round, is to talk to you about we're happy to help frame some of your housing discussions. And I have one of our team members is on this call, Wendy Rowe. Hi, Wendy. So she and a couple other members of our team, Shifra Gamita and Corinne Yantz, are incredibly knowledgeable about housing issues around the state. and all of us are at your disposal for questions. And what we can help you with is we can help connect you with resources, with data and resources about your communities and housing. A lot of this information I'm sure you all already know and have access to, but we can help make other connections if you need it. Be with demographics and local housing support organizations. We're also happy to help co-facilitate housing discussions if you wanted to host a community housing discussion. We can connect and coordinate with local housing committees and organizations. And then we're also happy to help you talk through if you have some ideas for some activities you want to do for Fair Housing Month, but aren't sure about the Fair Housing Connection or want to talk through any ways to customize it for your town. We're more than happy to do that. We'd love to help brainstorm and bring some resources to those conversations as well. And we'd also love for you to share your activities with us. So we'll be putting together a statewide calendar of fair housing events. And so we would love to include all these wonderful discussion groups and story walks and art events and all these wonderful things that you'll be doing. We would love to include them on our fair housing calendar as well. So bottom line is we want to hear from you. And we're really excited about working with you. Thank you. And I am going to turn it over to Laura.
Thanks, Jess. So I hope all of you will consider taking advantage of Jess's offer to join you in those book club discussions and to help frame the discussions with you. I think that is a really generous offer, and I hope you will take advantage of her offer to post your events on their statewide calendar. So please consider doing that as well. And so next up, we have Jonathan, who's going to talk about another resource for you to consider with your Fair Housing Month activities.
Thank you. Actually, two resources. My name is Jonathan Clark. I am the Youth Services Consultant for the Vermont Department of Libraries. And there are a couple of things that we are really excited about that we're working on. One of them is we're going to be encouraging story walks, and you can use anything from the book list. We are encouraging to use the book A Chair for My Mother by Vera B. Williams. Actually, I forgot to do that. I had a link to it I was going to put in there so that you can see the book if you're not
I can do
familiar.
it,
You may be
Jonathan.
familiar. Oh yeah, if you can do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Yeah, it's kind of a classic. You may have even seen it on shelves before. It's a great book. It's beautiful illustrations, and it is the story of a young woman, Rosa, and her home is destroyed by a fire, and then her family saves up. They find a new place to live, and they save up, and they buy coins to buy this really comfy chair. And it's a great way. It's a really beautiful story. It's a great way to talk about what makes the place you live a home, whether that's house, apartment, mobile home, temporary housing. And what it might feel like to lose your home and have to start over again to rebuild it. And sometimes it's those little things, and sometimes it's the comfy chair that makes all the difference. Those familiar things. So it's a great starting place to have those kind of discussions with children. And it's all over, like probably, again, most libraries have multiple copies of it. It's very available in the catalog, and it's also very cheap to purchase. So if you wanted to make your own story walk, we will have some instructions of how to do that, some guidelines. And we were also working on having a few story walks that we are going to make that will be available to check out. So we're working on that as well. And so we are excited about that. And it's also, the other thing about A Chair for My Mother is that it's also because they are saving up, it's often used to discuss financial literacy, and April is also Financial Literacy Month, so it's a great way to tie those together as well. And then the other thing is that we are going to have a Fair Housing Month reading challenge on Beanstack, for those of you who are familiar with Beanstack. And if you're not, hopefully you'll check it out, and maybe we can throw a link into our Beanstack page as well. It's not this particular challenge is not up yet, but we have some other challenges that are live right now. It's a great way to be able to. We're going to use the list that you saw earlier, the reading list, and then folks can read that, and it will be for all ages can participate in this and can read any of the books from the list or other books that are related to fair housing. There will also be some you sort of are able to log your reading, the books that you've read, and then you earn little digital badges. We will also have some like activities for, if they attend the program at the library or other programs related to fair housing during the month. There'll be some little digital badges that they can earn. So we will have that, and we will be passing along more information about that as we build it out.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. So I just put a question in there. Can they log movies as well, even though it's a reading challenge?
Yeah, I mean, we could, yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we might have to we'll put something specific for that. But yeah, especially since it's on the list, we can make sure that that works for that. It could be one of the activities, probably more than like logging the reading. So yeah, we could absolutely do that.
Great.
Good idea.
Thank you. So we're in the Q&A phase, and you're welcome to type your questions in the chat. I just wanted to mention something that to what Kevin said. So Kevin said to create some norms around the group process and behavior and all of that before starting. And I found that to be really effective when the group itself sets the norms and comes up with the guidelines for themselves, just because then you're not coming in and kind of dictating how they should behave. And it's a good process for groups that are also new to each other, because it's almost like an icebreaker where they get to know each other really quickly. So I just wanted to toss that in too. Type your questions. You can raise your hand. You could also, with this group, because we're not that large, you could turn on your mic and ask your questions using your voice. So go ahead.
Jeanette, I also wanted to point out that Amy Olson put in a great link to calling out versus calling in document, and I would highly recommend that. Helpful with conversation as well.
Great. While we're waiting for questions, I had a question for Jess. Jess, I don't know if you mentioned how transportation also falls into this fair housing issue, because transportation obviously is an issue unto itself, but I think we also hear a lot about how that complicates things with housing and finding housing and the whole cycle of work, housing, how do I get there, school, all of that. Do you have any comments about that with regard to Vermont specifically, because there's no public transportation? And you are muted.
Most certainly, it is real. Transportation is really connected to our housing issues, because especially in a rural state, and with such so many limitations on housing that are that's in our town centers, that a lot of the available housing right now is in more rural areas, and Vermont also has a very old housing stock. So the homes that are available are not just in rural areas, but they tend to be larger and older. I think more than half of the homes in the state were built before 1980, and so when you combine all those things, that if the only place you can find an affordable home isn't accessible by public transportation, then you can't get to your job, so you can't afford your home. And so all these things are so connected. and have such a big impact on every aspect of our life, that and I think that it's really important to think about, and I like that you brought that up, because this topic of housing can be connected to so many different things, and so it's a really nice way to include housing in whatever community discussion you're having, because at some point it's making an impact on people's lives.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, things that you forgot to say, want to add? So I want to, I'll ask our participants a question then. So what, if anything, have you already done, have you already done in your communities for fair housing? What do you think about possibly doing, just sort of off the top of your head, even if you hadn't really thought about it? What are you thinking right now about that? Chime in either by voice or by chat.
So I'll just jump in with one thing that we did. I mentioned this at our last session as well, but we tried to lower the barrier for getting a library card. And Laura mentioned that that can be a challenge for folks. So we have a card that you can get regardless of having any credentials in terms of where you, proving that you live where you live, or even being in Shelburne, where I'm the director, for any specific period of time. You can come in and without any credentials get a card that will let you check out a limited amount of material. And so that's one step we took to kind of lower the barrier of access. And the other thing that we've been working on is a new strategic plan. And we're trying to look at ways we can serve folks who are not our traditional library users. And we feel like one of those segments are folks who are in transitional housing. And so we're not yet focus on that group, but we're planning to focus on trying to serve that group effectively. So that's a couple of steps we've taken in Shelburne.
And have you already done your book club, Kevin, or are you planning on doing it with one of those two books?
Yeah, so we're definitely going to incorporate our book club over the last couple of years has started to incorporate more social issue related books in it. And I think this really fits in very well with that focus. So we've been reading some things on racial justice. We've been reading various other, a book on poverty. And I think that fair housing is, as much of a social issue as any of these things. And so I think a part of taking our book group away from fun, well, not fun, but I should say kind of quaint, interesting fiction into more issue-based discussion has been a gradual process, but certainly we plan on borrowing one of the book sets to do that.
Yep, that makes sense. Go ahead, Joy.
Oh, I just wanted to add again that those types of book clubs are such great partnering opportunities because of the other local organizations that might be interested in the topics. So remember your social justice organizations, your churches.
Yeah, and they often come with people who can speak to these topics because that's what they do. And you would have your expert right there in your backyard. So it's important to remember them for that as well. And Sue posted, when I posted to our community that the Springfield Supported Housing Program needed sheet sets, I had a few questions asking what SSHP was. So I'm thinking we should offer a program for the SSHP to discuss what they do. Same with Springfield Housing Authority and our Springfield Family Center. That, I think that is a really great example of what we were just talking about. And if a book club is the mechanism to raising awareness for what's happening in your community, and also to get all the groups into a room together, then that would be a really good way to do that. Or even a story walk for multi-generational events as well. Thank you, Sue, for that. Miranda, I saw you had started typing. Do you want to say something? I don't want to put you on the spot if you changed your mind, but you're welcome to turn on your mic and your camera if you want.
I was just saying that I'm really excited about the book sets. I feel like it's a great way to get people engaged in the conversation that maybe just a presentation or information wouldn't otherwise pull them in. I also felt like both of the books fit really well with the book discussion series we're currently working on, which is called Systemic Racism in America. So I feel like this just extends that conversation and also brings us to into more issues that we perhaps hadn't begun to discuss as part of this series. So I just wanted to share some appreciation and excitement, and I thank you very much.
And Miranda, where's your library?
I'm the interim director at Blake Memorial Library in East Corinth.
Okay, great, thank you. And we have Nate, who just posted. Nate is the new director in Winooski, and he said we also issue no credential cards on a 3-month basis. So no credential cards is for folks who don't have a permanent address and need access. Okay, Amy. Amy, do you want to turn on your mic and talk to us? Or should I read your comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. I've been having technical difficulties today, so I'm so happy. So I read about the Heart and Home Community Art Project that is done celebrating Fair Housing Month, and I would love to be able to replicate that in our community, where we could even maybe have some sort of kits that people could pick up, or if they didn't have the materials to be able to create the art themselves, but open-ended, any kind of art that they wanted to create, and then take a picture of it, and we'd have a page on our website. And Jessica, is that something that CVOEO does, every year, or a lot of times in partnership? Because I looked at some of the art on the website. It's absolutely really beautiful and heartfelt, and I think that could be really fun thing to do in COVID times too, something that people can do at home and send it in to us, so it's kind of crowdsourced.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Amy. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that's something that you'll be doing. So we have been doing the Heart and Home art activities for several years, and in past years they took the form of art exhibits. So we would invite local artists to show their work on the themes of inclusivity and home and community, and we would have art exhibits and activities related to those. But then last year, when COVID hit, we threw all these plans up in the air and thought, well, how do we get people involved, and how can we have what used to be in-person art creation workshops in COVID times? And so what we did was we put together little art kits. So we had just really inexpensive sets of paint and small canvases about this size that we dropped off for people and also mailed all over the state. And each of these kits, ended up costing us probably, less than $2 each. And then it was another few dollars for postage. And we sent them all over, and then people would do art either in their homes or in their small pods and send us pictures. And what we heard from folks was that they were so happy to have something to do, because this was April of last year, so it was when we were all still getting used to the new world. But they also said that it really helped them feel connected to other people, because they knew that there were people maybe one house over, maybe in one town over, maybe at the other end of the state, doing this, creating these same things together. And so that's a really wonderful way to help people think, to give an opportunity to have a positive activity that we can do together, or in solidarity with others, and to be thinking about these topics. So this year, we're not sure if we're going to be able to offer the art kits like we did last year, but we're changing some things in our budget. So we should know within the next couple of weeks, we'll know if we can offer those up again. So thank you for participating.
And Amy, it's funny that you bring this up, because this group had been meeting for a while now, and I wasn't really aware of these kits and that CVOEO had sent those out. So you learn something every time. And Jess, I think this might be something that we should talk about, because we could put it down as another suggestion for libraries to do, is maybe get those art kits out. And I assume you have the specs and all the materials and all of that stuff that we could probably just promote as well. So this is a great conversation that is helping us with ideas as well, just as it should be.
And it's perfect because so many libraries are doing similar things to that. They're doing kits that, you know, that people can pick up and take home and do a craft. So this could be like a pretty easy step for them to make, I think, for it to have a theme like this.
Yeah. Miranda says we do monthly craft kits. This would be great, a great way to extend that. Yes. Have a theme with it. That's excellent. I'm sure we'll be adding that to our page as well.
Since some people are starting to leave, I'm just going to put the evaluation link in the chat. It would be really helpful if people could do this for us so we can use it for future planning. Thank you.
Yep, and then I'm also going to put a plug in for your social media channels. When you do this stuff, it'd be great if you could link to CVOEO's channel. I'm not sure, Jess, whether you have a fair housing specific hashtag or, okay, so we'll put that up as well on the website. So please share, tag fair housing in that, and if you want, you can tag us and BLA as well, but you don't have to. And we also love sharing your stuff too. So if you're doing something cool, let us know and we'll share. Any other questions? Okay, so hearing none, I would say we call it a day for today, but I think this might be an ongoing conversation. And as you have additional ideas, feel free to send them to us. We're always happy to put them up. This isn't limited to just whatever we come up with, so we're always appreciative of your ideas. And we'll see you in April, if not before. Anybody else want to add anything? Kevin, Philip, Jess?
Just
Okay,
thank you
have a
all
good
for
afternoon,
coming.
everybody. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Goodbye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.